Welcome on board the Rich Planet Starship, broadcasting from somewhere high above the Earth. I'm Richard D. Hall, and a Happy New Year to all and sundry. The Chief Press Officer of the Met Office, Dave Britton, recently said in a press release to the Global Warming Policy Foundation, the Met Office has not issued a seasonal forecast to the public and categorically denies forecasting a mild winter, as suggested by London Mayor Boris Johnson. Following public research, the Met Office no longer issues long-range forecasts for the general public. Instead, we provide a monthly outlook on our website, which has consistently and clearly signposted the very cold conditions. James Dellingpole of the Daily Telegraph commented, "We paid for 90% of the Met Office's £30 million computer. We also fund a hefty chunk of its annual £170 million running costs. And now the Met Office tell us that it is incapable of providing the effective long-range forecasts." On a different note, we need to point out some facts. During the 1960s and 70s, various countries, including the United States and Russia, developed weather modification technology. Before your brain shuts down and goes into denial of the facts, hear me out. An example of technology which is known to have been used to block weather fronts is ELF radio waves. That stands for extra low frequency. This technique works by creating what are called standing waves, using two transmitters at opposite points on the globe which simultaneously send out high energy, very low frequency waves, creating a standing electromagnetic wave which can be used as a barrier against weather fronts. This is just one of many techniques which have been developed behind the closed doors of secret technological research. I can assure you there are a plethora of other methods which have been developed to modify our weather. There are many motives that, let's just say, an agency might have for modifying the weather. Innocent motives, such as preventing droughts to obtain good crop yields, might be one. Then there is a whole bag of less savoury motives, which when applied are collectively referred to as weather warfare. Scenarios include creating floods, hurricanes and extreme weather conditions in your enemy's part of the world. Again, I urge you not to switch off at this point by crawling back into your bubble of denial and hear me out. Think about it for a second. If you could bring your enemy to its knees by causing a flood, you don't even need an army. You can win the war by pressing a few buttons and twiddling a few knobs. 34 years ago, weather modification was of such international concern that the United Nations drew up an agreement on the prohibition of weather control, particularly hostile weather warfare. The United Nations General Assembly Resolution 31/72 TIAS 6914 Convention on the Prohibition of Military or any other hostile use of environmental modification techniques. The convention was signed in Geneva on May 18, 1977 and entered into force on October 5, 1978. The treaty states, desiring to prohibit effectively military or any other hostile use of environmental modification techniques in order to eliminate the dangers to mankind from such use, and affirming their willingness to work towards the achievement of this objective. Each state party to this convention undertakes not to engage in military or any other hostile use of environmental modification techniques having widespread, long-lasting or severe effects as the means of destruction, damage or injury to any other state party. Each state party to this convention undertakes not to assist, encourage or induce any state, group of states or international organizations to engage in activities contrary to the provisions of paragraph 1 of this article. As used in Article 1, the term environmental modification techniques refers to any technique for changing through the deliberate manipulation of natural processes, the dynamics, composition or structure of the Earth, including its biota, lithosphere, hydrosphere and atmosphere, or of outer space. Those that are still listening should all now be perfectly clear on the facts. Weather modification has been possible for at least 40 years, and the UN said in 1977 that nobody should use the technology for purposes of war. Do you really think that nations such as America and Russia would simply have stopped all research into these areas because of the United Nations Treaty? The treaty also states the provisions of this convention shall not hinder the use of environmental modification techniques for peaceful purposes. Is this not the perfect excuse to continue research and development? I can hear you saying, what on earth is this fruitcake suggesting here? That the recent cold weather has been created by some agency. Again, I urge you not to switch off at this point by crawling back into your comfortable bubble of denial and hear me out. If people cannot see an obvious motive for something, such as weather modification over Great Britain, they will go into denial about what might be happening. Just because the motive is not obvious to us at this point in time does not mean that technology is not being used to create some of the most bizarre weather on record. Ask yourself, why suddenly can the Met Office no longer provide long-term forecasts with all the computer technology at their disposal? Another possible factor in all of this is that you don't think that a democratic government or governments with nice guys like Barack Obama and David Cameron at the top would authorize such a crazy plan. I would totally agree. But the weather weapons are not in the hands of our puppet leaders. They are in the hands of a global structure which transcends national barriers and is certainly not democratic. Ask yourself this question. If the UN addressed this issue of weather modification for hostile purposes in 1977, how come this is never discussed in mainstream media as a potential cause of severe or highly unusual weather conditions? I personally am very suspicious of the floods which occurred in Pakistan in 2010. If these floods were engineered, what an ingenious way of taking control of a country that you wish to build an oil pipeline through. I'm not suggesting that I have all the answers here, or I can say for sure what is going on. But what I can say is that the questions I have raised in this item are not being asked. A few weeks ago, I reported on the case involving a man who sent copies of a DVD he produced called 7/7 Ripple Effect to a court in 2008. He believed the evidence presented in his film should be considered by the court, as it was relevant to claims being made by the judge and the prosecution barrister. 7/7 Ripple Effect provides a compelling case that the alleged terrorists accused of carrying out the London bombings in 2005 were actually taking part in a mock terror training exercise and were set up by intelligence agencies who then murdered the framed Muslims. The maker of the film, who uses the name Muad'Dib, but whose birth name is Anthony John Hill, was arrested in February 2009 near Dublin under a European arrest warrant. The British government have successfully extradited him from Ireland to stand trial in the UK for trying to pervert the course of justice. A preposterous claim, as Hill was in fact trying to prevent a miscarriage of justice by providing his information to the court. Incidentally, the men in that case were found to be totally innocent. He is currently in Wandsworth Prison and has so far spent 90 days in prison waiting for various hearings. In November 2010, while in Wandsworth Prison awaiting trial, Hill applied for a bail hearing so he could be let out whilst awaiting his trial. The hearing date was put back to the 16th of December. Julian Assange, who runs the WikiLeaks website, which I shall come on to, at that time was also being held in Wandsworth Prison. His hearing for bail was held on the same date as Muad'Dib's. So what, you might say? Muad'Dib was taken to a different magistrate's court for his bail request to be heard, where he was refused bail. His bail hearing attracted no media coverage at all, while at the same time WikiLeaks man Julian Assange was greeted with a media entourage that the Sultan of Brunei would have been proud of. Was this a mere coincidence? Were these dates coincided deliberately to ensure media attention was on Assange and not on Muad'Dib? We on the Starship are deeply concerned about Muad'Dib. In his upcoming trial, he should be allowed a jury. That jury should be allowed to see the evidence, which means they should be given a viewing of his film, as it is the film, as claimed by the prosecutors, which was being used to attempt to pervert the course of justice. Any sane-minded person who watches the film will conclude that he was not attempting to pervert the course of justice. He was merely providing his honest account of the facts. When Muad'Dib wins his case, this will be a severe kick in the nuts for the prosecutors, which is why we are concerned for his safety. We fear they will either try and rig the trial somehow, or, as Muad'Dib himself suggested in his own words, he could end up down the memory hole before his trial starts. We wait to see what happens and will be watching and reporting on the case to see that justice is finally served. Huge media frenzy has surrounded Julian Assange in recent weeks. This is just one of many reasons that make us suspicious of the WikiLeaks outfit. Is WikiLeaks an attempt by the powers that be to create what is termed controlled opposition? Several factors make us distrustful of the whole WikiLeaks bandwagon. This is a view I did not have some 8 or 9 months ago, when WikiLeaks was not a household name. At that time, I emailed Julian Assange and asked him if he would appear on this show. I didn't get a reply. Let's start by saying that the war logs released by WikiLeaks on Afghanistan and Iraq provide an amazingly comprehensive account of the atrocities being carried out by the two invasions, and show that the US Army have been involved in torture and, some would go as far as to say, mass genocide. The releasing of this information is greatly applauded by us because only detailed scrutiny and publishing of the criminal acts can bring about changes in behaviour in the future. That said, we have some reservations about Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. Freedom House is a Washington-based watchdog organisation chaired by William H. Taft IV, who was legal advisor to the State Department under George W. Bush, and he was Deputy Secretary of Defense under Ronald Reagan. When WikiLeaks was set up around January 2007, they sought advice from Freedom House. WikiLeaks sought their advice on funding and also what sources Freedom House needed leaks on. WikiLeaks keeps its funding sources very secret. In August 2010, Assange said WikiLeaks gets about half of its money from modest donations processed by its website, and the other half comes from personal contacts, including people with some millions who approach us. If only Rich Planet could be approached by someone with millions. WikiLeaks has 2 tax-exempt charitable organizations in the US, known as 501c3s, which act as a front for the website. Assange has declined to give their names, saying they could lose some of their grant money because of political sensitivities. So in summary, we do not know who is funding WikiLeaks. According to email exchanges when WikiLeaks was first set up, acquiring covert funding from intelligence agencies was contemplated. WikiLeaks is not a typical alternative media initiative. Mainstream newspapers such as the New York Times, The Guardian and Der Spiegel in Germany have become directly involved in the editing and selection of leaked documents. This collaboration between WikiLeaks and mainstream media was part of an agreement between Assange and several major US and European newspapers. Historically, the New York Times has served the interests of the Rockefeller family. Ethan Bonner, deputy foreign editor of the New York Times, as well as Thomas Friedman, among others, are members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Because of the political affiliations of these newspapers, the leaks, once they are funneled into the corporate news chain, edited and redacted by the New York Times and other newspapers, are presented to serve the broader interests of US foreign policy, including propaganda directed against Iran. The leaks quoted by the Western media reveal the support of the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia to several Islamic terrorist organizations, a fact which is known and documented. However, What is not mentioned in these publications about the global war on terrorism is that US intelligence historically has channeled its support to terrorist organizations via Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. So the use of the WikiLeaks documents by the media tends to sustain the illusion that the CIA has nothing to do with the terror network and that Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states are providing the lion's share of funding to terrorist groups. If WikiLeaks is part of an awakening of public opinion, of a battle against the lies and fabrications which appear daily in the print media and on network television, how on earth can this battle against media disinformation be waged with the collaboration of the corporate media? WikiLeaks has enlisted the architects of media disinformation to fight media disinformation. If Julian Assange is serious about the truth, he should not be getting into bed with these organizations, who only put out information on their own terms and with their own spin. Julian Assange was recently asked about 9/11 and replied, "I'm constantly annoyed that people are distracted by false conspiracies such as 9/11, when all around we provide evidence of real conspiracies for war or mass financial fraud." You can do better than that, Julian. This sentence should ring alarm bells to anyone who has their eyes open. There are other areas of grave public concern that the WikiLeaks organization have nicely sidestepped. For example, the agenda of the pharmaceutical giants, Israeli intelligence activities, the Bilderberg conferences, and the fraudulent activities of the central banks, not to be confused with the crimes of the whipping boys of banking, the high street banks. After the break, I will be screening an interview that I recorded in November 2010 with author and researcher Lloyd Pye. Lloyd spent over 20 years researching human origins, and if you are not already aware of his work, his independent observations and conclusions have earth-shattering implications which might just change your view of how we came to be.